The countdown is on for our third annual Skift Global Forum East. Join us this November 19th and 20th in Dubai as we bring together 500 of the region's most powerful travel and tourism decision makers. With executives from companies like Emirates, Accor, Dubai Tourism, and Jumeirah in attendance, this is an event you can't afford to miss. Secure your tickets now at live.skift.com and get ready to connect and learn from the best at Skift Global Forum East.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. I'm Sarah Kopit, Skift's editor-in-chief. As always, here with Seth Borko, Skift's head of research. Hey, Seth.
Hey, Sarah. How's it going?
And welcome back. We missed you last week.
I know. It's good. It's good to be back. Genuinely good to be back. Although I was in Japan, so I'll admit that it was a pretty fun trip. So, you're in the travel industry. You got to travel. It has to happen.
Got to live the brand, right?
Yeah.
All right. So today we are going to talk about gambling in the UAE. Is the Middle East getting its very own Sin City? And to talk to us about it, we have Josh Corder, Skift's Middle East correspondent. Hey, Josh, how you doing?
I'm good, Sarah. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm great. Thank you for joining us today. But a quick reminder before we get started to send any questions or comments that you might have to podcasts@skift.com. And please don't forget to follow or subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening or watching. If you're enjoying the show, please rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review so we can spread the word about the Skift Travel Podcast. So Josh just wrote an amazing feature for Skift all about this topic. And Josh, in that, you described the casino industry in the UAE as being built quietly and in the shadows. Such delicious language. Why do you think that there's such secrecy there? And how do you think this impacts the public perception, both globally and locally, about what the UAE is doing?
So the funny thing is that they have all of this casino talk, Wynn coming in, MGM, gambling police being set up, and they have a law for it that they haven't released. It's called the UAE Federal Law by Decree regarding regulating commercial gaming. It's a mouthful, but it exists. They just won't release it for whatever reason. And the idea they're going for here is they basically want to have their casino industry be an avalanche. So they're doing all of this stuff behind the scenes, getting the operators, getting the licenses, building stuff. And then when it's all ready, they'll legalize it that day, is what I'm hearing from people and what I've heard from sort of conversations people in the gaming authority. They don't want to do it by any half measure. They don't want to go small. They want it to launch on the day and it be huge. To your second point of why they seek to, for now, and what impact does that have? Analysts have been sort of frustrated listening to Wynn say it's coming. They don't really believe it. And a major sticking point for everyone is, where's that federal law? Where is it? But just in the last week or so, on Friday, Wynn announced that they got their gaming license, and since then their stock has been doing really well. So they're at 106.4, which is really good for them. It's close to their peak of 110.3 in April, and at the moment they're up 16.9% since the start of this year. So when it actually came time for them to give concrete evidence, they started to do really well. So the appetite is there from investors. They just need to start telling us more about it, because when they don't, the stock prices doesn't change much, but when they do, it starts to improve.
So, Josh, the UAE they've kind of legalized gambling, but not officially, and they've granted these licenses, but not officially. Who's going to gamble? Who's going to come to the UAE to gamble? I assume that this is really geared towards foreigners. I believe that's what you reported in your story. Who do you think the UAE's target market for this market is?
Yeah, so just to talk about the foreigner aspect, so the UAE, 80% of its population are foreigners, so it's a very small percentage that are actual locals. And while we don't have the federal law to look at, we can look at the rules for advertising, which the Gambling Authority have released. And in that, it says stuff like no national dress, so the clothing that Emiratis wear You can't have that in your advertising or campaigns. No depiction of Islamic or Emirati culture. No use of the flags, no use of the royal family members. So it's very much indicating that locals perhaps won't be allowed in, but will have to not wear their national dress. The same as you can technically go to a bar if you're not in your local dress, and they're not going to ask what nationality you are. In terms of the foreigners that will come in, so both MGM and Wynn have said that they're thinking India. So if you look at sort of a map of where Wynn resorts are in the world, you have Las Vegas, one end of the US, and you have Boston on the other end. Then you have Macau on one end of Asia, and you have the UAE on the other end of Asia. So it's they very much have a whole sort of span across the entire world now, and the idea is it's going to be GCC markets, so the rest of the Middle East, India, Europe, and then maybe Chinese as well.
But can I ask a quick follow-up question there? Because you made an interesting distinction between locals versus foreign residents. Is the market for this actual true like tourists, people who are flying in to go gamble, or is it those non-local residents, or is it kind of both? Is there no distinction really?
No, it's definitely both. So Bill Hornbuckle, CEO of MGM, said last month at Skift Global Forum that UAE people living in the UAE have a lot of money to spend, and that they will definitely go to his properties if and when they open over here. So the idea is that UAE residents themselves have a lot of money to spend here, and then as well it will be foreigners from overseas.
That's really interesting. And when people, at least in the West, often describe Dubai, or at least I've heard it described as, it's like the Vegas of the Middle East. You already hear that. So it kind of does feel like a bit of a natural fit. But, given the UAE's very kind of strict cultural and legal stance on issues like alcohol, public behavior, how is the government there kind of reconciling this shift towards gambling for foreign tourists or locals who are not Emirati, while maintaining kind of the local laws and values? Like, how are they going to thread that needle?
I mean, again, it's tricky to sort of guess what they're doing without seeing that law. We all wish we could see it, but yeah, look at what happened with booze. So when that came about, when people started moving to the UAE, 80s and 90s, you could only get a drink in 5-star hotels. And then gradually, it started to be 4-star hotels, 3-star hotels, and then non-hotel restaurants. So there's sort of a gradual progression with these things. In terms of what they're doing specific to gaming, it does seem that it'll be heavily, heavily regulated. So again, advertising is a good way to look at it. There are specific rules in place that you can't send advertising to do with gaming to someone who hasn't opted into it, and that you also have to give them the option to opt out of it as well. So if I can only see gaming, if I look it up, I click a box and say, yes, please send me more of this. And they also have the UE Responsible Gaming Alliance. Again, we don't know too much about it yet, but this will be the people to oversee all of the messaging, all of the programming, make sure everybody's well behaved. They'll have an instant register, so every gaming operator will, by law, be required to keep a log of everybody who does something wrong, and then they won't be allowed back in the casinos. The voluntary exclusion program, like I said, that's one of the big ones. You can basically say, I don't trust myself with gambling for whatever reason, had a bad past with it, whatever. You can say, I want to make it so it is literally forbidden for me to come into your casino. So you can add your name to that list as well.
And how would they police that?
So what a lot of people are saying, analysts especially, is that the UAE is going to follow a similar model to Singapore in how they run resorts. Basically, when you enter a casino in Singapore, there's 2 entrances, one for residents who will have to pay a levy to enter, basically to discourage them from going too much, and an entrance for foreigners who go in for free, but you have to show your passport in Singapore to enter the casino.
Okay.
I can't find any rules around that in the UAE, but I'm 100% certain, you'll need some kind of ID, just like you do with alcohol.
So Wynn and MGM, they're both poised to build these like massive gambling establishments. Do you think that there's any risk of them cannibalizing themselves? Like if we're going to see these mega resorts kind of like we've seen in other places, do you think that do you think that there's enough demand in the region for all of these massive gambling places for people to go?
So the funny thing is, everyone looks at Dubai as a hotel mecca, which it is. It has
Hmm.
80% occupancy every year, rates of $140 a night every day of the week. More hotel rooms than Las Vegas now are in Dubai. But casinos and hotels are totally, totally different things. I mean, they're totally different businesses. Dubai, its main commodity in the hotel is the room. And I know it sounds super obvious, like, yeah, obviously the main thing is the room. But for a casino resort, the room is the add-on, right? It's secondary to going there to gamble. So if you actually look at the revenue split of Wynn, of MGM, you know, Wynn made $3.7 billion in revenue from their casino last year, compared to 1.1 billion in their hotel rooms. So it's a totally different business, and it's a business that doesn't exist here. So I don't think it's going to step on any hotel operators' toes. It's just a case of how many casinos can the country take.
Yeah, and in much of the world, in Vegas in particular, right? Yeah, you're running a casino business, and you're just giving people a place to stay so they can gamble a little bit longer, a little bit later into the night, right? And that actually leads to my next question, which is about Vegas and Singapore and many of these other gambling hubs. I'm curious. We've been so focused on the conversation about what's happening in the UAE. I'm curious about read through to other gambling destinations. I recently went to Las Vegas. I stayed at the Wynn. It was a really great hotel. Everything in the room has English and it also has Chinese because they get a huge amount of high roller Chinese gamblers. Now, you don't need to look that hard to see that it's a lot easier to get to Dubai from China than it is to get to Las Vegas. So I'm curious, we're talking about cannibalizing within the UAE, but what about cannibalizing on a global scale? Like, is this a threat to Vegas? Is it a threat to Singapore? Is it a threat to Macau, some of these other major gambling hubs? What do you think about that?
I think that the business model that Vegas has is so far ahead of what the UE is in terms of progressiveness, in terms of just how deep they go into the Sin City image. I don't think Vegas has too much to worry about. I definitely think that Macau could have some issues now because, yeah, and the question is Wynn going to cannibalize themselves? Is they going to pull business away from Macau, which is their biggest casino market of their
Yep.
properties? It's possible because this is going to be their first beachfront resort. The idea is that this will be their most sort of rounded. It's not just about gaming property in their portfolio. So that's what they're going for with the property in Ras Al Khaimah. So there's a definite chance that you're going to see a lot more Asian travelers not only come to the Wynn in Ras Al Khaimah, but perhaps stay longer than they would in Macau because there's just a greater variety to do. There's the beach, there's Dubai next door. Whereas Macau, 36% of its GDP in Macau is gambling. I mean, it is the only thing you can do there is play with cards. Whereas in the UE, they're going for a much more rounded experience.
You could conceivably convince the wife and kids that this is a cultural vacation with a little bit of gambling, as opposed to Macau, where you're really only going for one reason.
On your point about the cultural stuff, so the MGM Dubai, it's a $2.5 billion project. It's being built right opposite a mosque, and it's sandwiched in between two long-standing fisherman restaurants. For whatever reason, the MGM Dubai is in one of the most culturally guarded parts of the city. It's on a strip opposite villas owned by locals. So let's see what they do with that.
So I mean, I can only imagine, like my mind goes to a lot of terrible places thinking like I've been to Vegas, like, you see things happen there that, stay there as the very famous tag phrase goes. But, casinos do oftentimes elicit bad behavior, problematic behavior. I am sure that the UAE is aware of this, that MGM and Wynn, they obviously are aware of this, but how do you think that the UAE is going to manage some of these like social potential cultural risks, especially given what you just said? I mean, with a mosque right across the way. How are, we hear about these things sometimes in the news, actually not very often lately, but you hear about, foreigners who go to Dubai cross some sort of, social, cultural laws, usually, about alcohol, public nudity, something like that, and they get arrested and thrown in jail. How is the UAE going to manage this part of, the reality of what bringing casinos might mean for the country?
So I'll be delicate how I answer this. I'm very conscious of cultural sensitivities, as I'm trained to call it. The speculation is the reason that Ras Al Khaimah is the first one to do it instead of Dubai or Abu Dhabi is because it's a lesser known emirate, it's further away, and they can sort of see what happens as this craziness unfolds. Yeah, people won't know about it, but when Atlantis, the mega resort on the artificial man-made island, opened in 2008, amid a financial crisis, that hotel was heavily uh, scrutinized and bashed for being overtly luxurious in a time of struggling, and it was seen as a massive shift away from Middle Eastern values and towards more Westernization. So the Atlantis faced a lot of issues with that when it opened, and as time went on, the government saw how much money it was making, and they just sort of went, okay, well, we'll leave it be. And tourists went there, and they said, well, this is pretty nice. It's got good service, it's got good whatever. So they let it slide too. I think, yeah, Ras Al Khaimah is going to be sort of the test bed for this, and then see how it goes.
Yeah.
Again, we don't have a law to look at, but we know there's going to be strict regulations on the players. So there'll be cooling off periods. There'll be limits on how much they can bet. They'll each have their own account tied to their name. So yeah, it's going to be heavily sort of watched. And I think we're talking about it as a new Sin City. I think it's not going to be Las Vegas on a Friday night, day one, but maybe it's going to be like how Singapore is for the first 5-10 years, and then after that, we'll get a bit more debaucherous.
They're going for a more Monaco, sophisticated, older view of gambling rather than the more modern Sin City perspective, perhaps.
So what Wynn constantly remind me is that this is a resort more about entertainment than it is casinos. So it will have light shows, events, theatre, 24 restaurants, a mall, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's definitely a higher end form of gaming that we're seeing potentially forming at the moment.
Yes,
sure.
just like you said, Seth. It's like bring the family for a cultural holiday.
Although they'll still find a way to part you from your money when you're playing this. The odds are still going to be in their favor, but yeah, bring the family and do a little bit of gambling.
The house always wins. All right, so let's take a break here, and we'll be back on the other side.
Are you tired of sifting through endless resumes looking for the perfect candidate to fill a leadership opening? Skift Executive Search can help. We have an insider view of the travel industry and can leverage both our expertise and connections to find your next rockstar hire. To learn more, visit skift.com/exec-search or email us at execsearch@skift.com.
Welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. We are still joined by Josh Corder, our Middle East reporter, and we are discussing the developments of gambling and a gaming industry in the United Arab Emirates. So where we just left off before the break, we were actually talking about the differences between the Emirates, right? The United Arab Emirates it's just like the name says, they are a bunch of Emirates that are united in a group. Dubai gets a lot of the headlines. Abu Dhabi is sort of the capital where things are run out of. Ras Al Khaimah, and I'm not pronouncing that right. It's supposed to be like a Al Khaimah, right? But likes to be known as, sometimes known as, I won't say likes to be known as, sometimes known as Ras Al Khaimah, is one of the smaller emirates, perhaps less well known on the global scene. But what you were just telling us, Josh, is that RAC is going to be the test bed for the new Wynn Resort. I'm really curious about this, and I want to push you to tell us a little bit more about this. Why is RAC willing to be the test bed for this? Is this because they think that they're like an underdog? Is there a bit of a chip on their shoulder relative to the other Emirates, and do they think they need an edge? Or are they, or are the other Emirates on board? Are they pushing this forward and the other Emirates don't want to see it happen? I mean, how do we think about these inter-Emirate relationships and why RAC?
I think the official messaging from the Ras Al Khaimah Tourism Development Authority, RAC TDA, is that they are the nature emirate. They have the mountains, they have mangroves, all that sort of stuff. But really, they are entirely being built around the gaming now. So if they tell you anything otherwise, so they're targeting 3 million visitors by 2030. Right now, or in 2023, they had 1.2. So just over doubling it. And if you're wondering how much of it is because of the win, well, at the moment, Ras Al Khaimah employs 6,000 people in its hotel industry. It's around 5% of employment in the emirate. The Wynn alone, opening in 2027, will employ 7,000 people. So just by itself, it's doubling the size. And by 2030, there's going to be 25,000 hotel employees in the emirate. So they're pegging themselves massively against this project, and they need to. So I know in our piece we said it's going to weigh on public finances. It's a $3.9 billion resort. Much of that money coming from the government. Is it worth it? Well, what we've seen since it was announced in 2022 is a massive sort of gold rush of development, like Dubai, but before the financial crisis. So every single plot of land on Marjan Island, which was for a while not doing that great, has now been sold because everybody wants a hotel next to the casino.
And Marjan Island is part of RAC, right?
Yeah, so Marjan Island is the offshore man-made island on which the Wynn will sit, like how Dubai has the Palm Jumeirah Island. And
is it shaped like anything interesting?
Yeah,
like a palm tree?
I mean, it has an interesting shape, but I don't think it's modelled after a particular item. It's just a cool shape.
Carry on. Yes. Okay.
Anyway, over the past 8 months alone, bear in mind the Wynn has been announced since January 2022. Over the past 8 months, property prices have increased 25%, and it's going to increase a lot more following it. I reckon from this Friday or last Friday, when the license got announced, it's gonna go up even more. And if you look on Property Finder, which is like the UE version of Zillow, 1,500 listings in Ras Al Khaimah mention the word casino in their title, in their prospectus, saying, casino view, 5 minutes from casino, right next to the Wynn Casino. It's everywhere. Some of them copy my stories in their brochures. So much of the development in Ras Al Khaimah is dependent upon getting that casino going.
This sounds like the world's worst kept secret. Period.
Yeah, I mean it's all coming out of the open now. There's only so long.
Yeah.
I think the issue for the UAE is that they're now dealing with public companies, right? They founded Jumeirah, they got Atlantis, private companies owned by the government. But MGM and Wynn, you can't lie to the shareholders. So it's all got to come out.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about sports. We have in Las Vegas, we talked to their tourism officials. We talked to the president of the Raiders who play in Las Vegas. They are doubling down on sports in addition to obviously gambling and casinos. Do you think the UAE is going to try to do the same, take Las Vegas's really successful model of bringing in, sports as entertainment and combining it with gambling?
I mean, I think this sort of goes back to Seth's question of how are the Emirates linking up together, and I think sports is going to be one of the ways. So Abu Dhabi is very much for the sports and event Emirate. It has the Formula One track, obviously, which does very well every year. It just had the Celtics playing, I think it was last weekend. They have NBA events, they have the UFC Dome. So they're very much the sports and event place. So I think what I would do if I was running a holiday in the UAE is I would say go do your concert with Coldplay. Coldplay is also going to Abu Dhabi. Go do your Coldplay concert 2.5 hours away from the casino. Then go up to Dubai in the middle, an hour away. Go to Palm Island where it has all the best restaurants, the beaches, and then the third leg of your trip, go to Ras Al Khaimah. So there aren't many sports developments going on in RAK itself. It's mainly centered in Abu Dhabi. But I reckon that is the string that they're going to go for. Yeah. Sport Emirate, luxury shopping Emirate in Dubai, and then gambling Emirate in Ras Al Khaimah.
So that's actually a really interesting point where it's becoming, you potentially see a future where it's less of visiting one emirate, visiting Dubai or visiting Abu Dhabi, and more of truly visiting the country, visiting the actual United Arab Emirates as a whole. That's an interesting concept there.
I mean, that's what they're going for. And again, I think an important part of the puzzle is connectivity. When I don't think have given visitor projections for Marjan, but whatever it is, I doubt that the Ras Al Khaimah airport, which is pretty small, can satisfy routes as well as DXB can, Dubai International Airport. So yeah, I think you'll see a lot of people landing in Dubai, spending a couple of days there, and then making the drive up to Ras Al Khaimah.
And so you're talking about, I guess, partnerships between the Emirates, and we're talking about connectivity. I mean, I want to go back. You mentioned this earlier, right? Like, there's also partnerships between foreign corporations, and like you rightly mentioned, these are major public companies with global shareholders. So how do you think that plays out in the future as the UAE as a whole continues to evolve? There's this dynamic between publicly traded companies that have sort of a legal mandate to be a little more transparent. There's local ownership and local partnerships. Like, how do you think that this shapes the future of UAE, not just their gaming industry, but their tourism industry in terms of public-private partnerships, and what does bringing in publicly traded casinos mean for that?
Yeah, so I think the UAE has a target of rapidly increasing its tourism numbers by 2031. I think it's up to 40 million hotel guests across the country that they want. And to do that, you need a diversity of offerings. It can't just be restaurants, malls, and beaches anymore. You have to bring in different service providers, whether it's NBA, whether it's Madison Square Garden with a Sphere, whether it's Wynn or MGM or Caesars with a casino. You need to bring in these international service operator experts, and to be one of those, you're probably a publicly traded company. So you're going to see a lot more of these partnerships with these public entities coming in as they look to diversify what they can do. Because again, for so long, and this has been said on stage at our events before, Dubai puts itself on the map with super tall buildings and malls. Now is the time to really diversify what they offer.
All right, Josh Corder, final thoughts. What do you think gambling will ultimately leave as a legacy for the UAE?
Look, I think this is one of the biggest shifts in tourism in the world going on right now and ever as well. It's projected it could be as big as an $8.5 billion industry. I mean, when we look back at Dubai, put itself on the map with the world's tallest building and biggest artificial islands, this is an even bigger move than that.
And just to clarify, that's per year, right? That dollar figure.
That's per year. I mean, estimates float between a new one from Bloomberg last week was 6.6 billion, up to 8.5 billion per year.
So, Josh, I think we'll leave it there. today. Thank you so much for joining us. For all of you listening, if you have questions or comments, please send your written or video questions to podcast@skift.com, and we might answer them on a future podcast. And thank you so much. Seth, Josh, have a great day. Thank you for listening to the Skift Travel Podcast. Wherever you're listening, please make sure to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review. It really helps get the word out about us, our podcast, and make sure that we can still continue to bring it to you free of charge every week.
If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. That way you'll know every time we have a new episode.